They called it civilization, but in Gilded Age America, a marriage could be a business merger with lace on top. A wife carried the name, hosted the dinners, and produced the heirs. But the woman outside the vows could hold the real leverage because she held the secret. One private apartment, one paid-off doctor, one child with the wrong last name. But in a world run on reputation, the price of silence never stayed small. Tonight, we follow the hidden women who turned inheritance into a weapon and turned the perfect wife into collateral damage. The contract wife meets the secret. When the first anonymous letter arrives, it does not mention love. It lists dates, addresses, and a child. The envelope is cream-colored, expensive stock. The kind you use for wedding invitations or funeral announcements. The wife opens it in the morning room, a sunlight slanting through lace curtains, her breakfast cooling on Sèvres porcelain. She expects a charity solicitation or a dinner invitation. Instead, she finds 3 pages of precise handwriting. Not hysterical, not pleading, clinical. March 14th, 1892. The Breslin Hotel, room 412. June 6th, 1893. A brownstone at 207 West 73rd Street. December 2nd, 1894. St. Luke's Hospital, private pavilion. And then the name. A boy, 3 years old. Her husband's eyes. In the world of old money America, marriage was architecture. You built it with the right family name, the right fortune, the right pedigree. Love was optional. Compatibility was negotiable. But reputation was load-bearing. A wife's job was to be seen at the right tables, wear the right pearls, produce the right heirs. She was the marble facade, beautiful, immovable, essential to the structural integrity of the family brand. But every fortress has a service entrance. The mistress economy operated in parallel to the marriage economy, and everyone understood the rules. A man of wealth kept a separate household the way he kept a yacht or a hunting lodge, discreetly, at a distance, with monthly expenses managed through intermediaries. The apartment lease signed under a cousin's name. The doctor paid in cash. The child enrolled in boarding school upstate, never photographed, never mentioned. As long as the machinery stayed invisible, society allowed the arrangement to hum along. The wife was expected to remain strategically blind, to accept the late meetings, the unexplained absences. The line items in the ledger marked miscellaneous or travel, to pour tea and smile at dinner parties while the other women murmured behind their fans. To understand that her husband's indiscretions were the price of her position, that her ignorance was a form of loyalty. But the letter changes the equation, because now there is proof. Proof can be circulated. Proof can be published. Proof can be entered into a courtroom. And in a world where reputation is the currency that buys access, influence, and dynastic survival, proof is a weapon that never needs to be fired to do its damage. The costs of maintaining silence in the 1890s were staggering and specific. A private apartment in Manhattan ran $800 a year, equivalent to roughly $28,000 today. A live-in maid cost another $300 annually. A private physician on retainer, one who understood the value of discretion, demanded $500 per birth, another $17,000 in modern terms. Boarding school tuition at a respectable but not too prominent institution ran $400 a year, and that was just the infrastructure. The real expense was the ongoing payments. $50 a month in allowance, another $20 for clothing, $30 for incidentals. By the time a secret child reached age 10, the minimum investment approached $15,000, over $500,000 in today's money, and that assumed she stayed quiet. The wife sits with the letter in her lap. The clock ticks. The servants move quietly in the hallway. Her marriage is not a love story. It never was, but it is hers. Her name on the calling cards, her children who will inherit, her place at the table when the family gathers. She has played her part flawlessly, attended every function, smiled through every slight, managed the household like a general managing supply lines. And now she discovers her husband has been building a second household, a shadow estate, with its own tenant, its own staff, its own heir. The question she faces is not whether to forgive. Forgiveness is for people who married for passion. The question is whether the secret can be contained. Whether the woman who sent this letter wants money, recognition, or revenge. Whether the walls of the fortress are thick enough to absorb the impact, or whether the first crack has already appeared. She folds the letter carefully, puts it in her desk drawer, locks it. Then she rings for her husband's secretary and asks for a complete accounting of household expenditures for the last 5 years. If this is war, she will fight with ledgers first and lawyers second. Because in old money America, the battlefield is always the bank account, and the first casualty is always trust. She did not want romance. The mistress does not ask for a wedding ring. She asks for a deed and a signed trust. Her name is Catherine, though he calls her Kate in private, and Miss Ellison in front of the hotel staff. She is 24 when they meet, performing in a second-tier theatrical production. Not famous, not scandalous, just visible enough to catch attention at the stage door. He is 41, married 15 years, with 2 daughters and a railroad fortune that generates $60,000 a year. She does not fall into his arms. She negotiates. The first meeting is backstage, the usual flowers and flattery. The second is dinner at a private dining room in the Hoffman House. The third is a discussion of terms. She will not be his plaything. She will not be discarded when the novelty fades. She wants security. He wants discretion. They shake hands like business partners, which is exactly what they are. Within 3 months, he has leased a brownstone for her on the Upper West Side. $1,800 a year, fashionable but not ostentatious, far enough from his own mansion on Fifth Avenue that the social circles do not overlap, close enough to his office that he can visit during the day without attracting attention. The lease is in the name of his lawyer's clerk. The furniture is delivered by a merchant who is paid to forget the address. The servants are hired through an agency that specializes in discretion. Catherine becomes indispensable not because she is beautiful, though she is. Not because she is charming, though she can be. She becomes indispensable because she understands the economics of her position and manages them like a professional. She keeps a calendar of his visits. She maintains relationships with his business associates, learning their names, their interests, their weaknesses. She hosts small dinners when he needs to conduct negotiations away from the scrutiny of his wife's social circle. She listens when he complains about the pressures of maintaining appearances. She never asks about his family. She never threatens to appear in public with him. She is, and in every functional sense, the wife he cannot acknowledge and the business partner he cannot afford to lose. The pipeline from private gifts to structured support is well established in this world. It begins with jewelry, small tokens of affection that can be dismissed as generosity. A brooch, a bracelet, nothing that would raise questions if noticed. Then come the practical necessities: rent, household staff, a carriage and driver, medical expenses when she falls ill with pneumonia in the winter of 1895. He pays for a private nurse, a specialist from Philadelphia, a 2-week stay at a sanatorium in the Catskills. The bills total $900, equivalent to over $30,000 today. By the second year, the relationship has evolved into a permanent installation, and he has given her a monthly allowance of $75, enough to maintain the household without needing to work. He has opened an account at a dressmaker who understands that discretion is worth more than advertising. He has arranged for her to receive tickets to the opera, seated in a box far from his own, where she can be seen but never introduced. And when she discovers she is pregnant in the spring of 1896, he does not panic. He plans. The birth is handled by a private physician in a rented cottage in New Jersey. No hospital records, no official registration. The child, a boy, is given her surname and a carefully constructed backstory. A cousin's child, orphaned young, adopted out of charity. The doctor is paid $300 for the delivery and another $200 for his permanent silence. The nurse who attends the birth receives $50 and a train ticket to Boston, where she has family and no reason to return. Catherine does not push for legitimacy. Not yet. She understands that timing is everything. The child is her insurance policy, her proof of the relationship's permanence, her claim on a future that extends beyond his affection. She does not demand recognition. She builds a file, every letter he writes, every receipt for household expenses, every gift, every payment, every promise made in private. She keeps them in a locked drawer in her bedroom, organized by date, cross-referenced by category. She is not preparing for a fight. She is preparing to win one if it becomes necessary. The emotional question hovers over her choices like smoke. Is she a victim of the system, trapped in a position with no legal standing and no social protection? Or is she the sharpest student of a ruthless economy, leveraging the only assets available to her in a world that gives women no other path to wealth? The answer depends on who you ask. His wife would call her a predator. His lawyer would call her a business problem. She would call herself a realist. And in the ledger books that track the household expenses, her name never appears at all. Because the most valuable skill in the mistress economy is not seduction, it is accounting, and Catherine is very, very good at her job. The wife learns the real numbers. At the bank, she discovers the withdrawals were not gambling losses. They were a second household. Eleanor has been married for 17 years. She knows her husband keeps separate finances. She knows there are investments she is not consulted on, clubs she cannot enter, decisions made in rooms where wives are not welcome. This is normal. This is the architecture of their class. But when the anonymous letter arrives, she does what any general would do when facing an invasion. She audits the supply lines. Her husband's personal account is not technically secret. She simply has never asked to see it. Why would she? The household account is generous, managed by the butler, and covers every expense from coal to champagne. But when she makes inquiries, her husband's private banker, a man who has known the family for 30 years, hesitates. Then he shows her the ledgers. 4 years of monthly withdrawals, $80 to $100 every month, like clockwork. Notation: household miscellaneous. Another line item: property maintenance, West Side, $1,800 annually. Medical consultations private, $900 in 1895 alone. Legal fees discretionary, $600. Travel expenses personal, another $1,000. Eleanor is not naive. She has heard the rumors, seen the knowing glances at parties, watched her husband leave early from dinners with vague excuses. But rumors are vapor. Numbers are evidence. And the numbers tell a story her pride had refused to let her acknowledge. Her husband has been maintaining a second wife in everything but name. A parallel household with its own budget, its own staff, its own claim on his time and resources. The totals are staggering when she calculates them. Over 4 years, he has spent roughly $20,000 on the other household. In today's terms, that is nearly $700,000, more than the cost of their summer home, more than she spends on clothing, entertaining, and charitable donations combined. It is not pocket change. It is a sustained, strategic investment in a second life. She does not confront him immediately. That would be emotional, and emotion is a liability in this kind of war. Instead, she begins her own accounting. She reviews the marriage settlement, signed when she was 19 and he was 27. She examines the trust that holds her dowry, the provisions that govern her children's inheritance, the legal mechanisms that were supposed to protect her in exactly this scenario. And she discovers what every wife of her generation eventually learns. The law is not built for her protection. It is built for the preservation of the family name, which means her husband's name, which means his control. Divorce is theoretically possible, but it would require proof of adultery presented in open court. It would mean public scandal, social exile, and the near certainty of losing custody of her children. And even if she won, the settlement would be determined by judges who believe a woman's value is measured by her ability to remain respectable. She would leave with an allowance and a stained reputation. He would leave with the fortune, the name, and the sympathy of every man in his club. So, she does what women of her class have always done. She performs ignorance while gathering intelligence. She smiles at dinners. She hosts charity luncheons. She kisses her daughters goodnight and reads them stories about princesses who marry princes and live in castles forever. And in the locked drawer of her desk, she keeps her own file. The ledgers, the letters, the names of witnesses who could testify if it ever came to that. She is not preparing to leave. She is preparing to hold her ground. Because in the world of old money, the public couple is the product, and the product must look untouchable even when the foundation is rotting. Her husband needs her as much as she needs him. He needs the respectable wife at his side when he negotiates with bankers. He needs the grand household that signals stability to investors. He needs the daughters who will marry into other wealthy families and expand his influence. The mistress can give him comfort, but only the wife can give him legitimacy. So, Eleanor makes a calculation. She will not acknowledge the secret. She will not demand explanations or apologies. She will simply ensure that when the crisis comes, and it will come, the law and the ledger favor her children. She quietly instructs her lawyer to restructure the family trust so that the bulk of the estate passes directly to her daughters, bypassing her husband's control. She establishes her own account at a different bank. She begins documenting every social engagement, every public appearance, building a record of her performance as the ideal wife. And when her husband comes home late again, smelling of unfamiliar perfume, she kisses his cheek and asks if he had a pleasant evening. He says yes. She says she is glad. And the dream continues, perfect and poisonous, built on a foundation of mutually assured silence. The scandal has not broken yet. The other woman has not demanded recognition. The child is still a rumor contained in an anonymous letter. To the outside world, they are the perfect couple, wealthy, connected, untouchable, the kind of family society pages celebrate and social climbers envy. But inside the mansion, in the locked drawers and private ledgers, the real accounting has already begun. And Eleanor knows that in a war of attrition, the side with better records usually wins. A child appears, the game changes. The scandal stops being about sex the day a birth certificate threatens the bloodline. For 6 years, the arrangement holds. Catherine raises the boy in quiet comfort. He is told his father is away on business, which is not entirely a lie. He is enrolled in a private academy under her surname, and introduced to neighbors as her nephew, and kept carefully away from any event where he might be photographed or recognized. He is 5 years old, healthy, intelligent, and increasingly aware that other children have fathers who come home at night. Then Catherine makes her first mistake. She names the child as a beneficiary in her own will. It is a practical decision. If she dies, who will support him? She has no family of means. Her theatrical career ended years ago. Her only source of income is the monthly allowance from a man who could terminate it at any moment. So she visits a lawyer, a different lawyer than the one her patron uses, and she drafts a simple will. If she dies, the child is to receive a trust of $20,000, enough to see him educated and established. The money is to come from her estate, though her estate is entirely dependent on the continued generosity of a man whose name does not appear in the document. The lawyer, being competent, asks the obvious question: where will this $20,000 come from? And Catherine, believing the lawyer is bound by professional confidence, tells the truth. It is an expected settlement, a gentleman's agreement, a promise made by the child's father, who is a man of considerable means and unquestionable honor. The lawyer, being practical, makes a note, and 6 weeks later, a copy of that note arrives on the desk of her patron's primary attorney, delivered by a clerk who understands that information has value and loyalty has a price. Now the game changes, because a child without a name is a private problem. But a child who appears in legal documents, named as a beneficiary, it's backed by an implied promise of financial support, is a claim on the estate. And claims on the estate are inheritance problems. And inheritance problems involve judges, witnesses, and public records that cannot be sealed or burned. The lawyers convene, not Catherine's lawyer, who is abruptly dismissed with a settlement fee and a warning about discretion. But the family's legal team, 3 men who specialize in trusts, estates, and the quiet resolution of problems that could damage a family's standing. They review the facts. The child is 6 years old. He bears a strong resemblance to their client. There are hotel registers, receipts, and witnesses who could place the two together over a period of years. A court would likely recognize paternity if the case were pressed. And if paternity is recognized, the child could claim a portion of the estate, even as an illegitimate heir. The mathematics are brutal. The family fortune is structured as a trust, distributing income to the legitimate heirs. If the boy is recognized, even informally, he could argue for a share. New York law at the time allows illegitimate children to claim support if paternity can be proven. The amount would be determined by a judge, but precedent suggests it could be as much as a third of what a legitimate child would receive. That would mean tens of thousands of dollars annually, drawn from an estate meant to support 2 daughters and maintain the family's social and financial position. So, the lawyers propose a solution. Pay her now. Pay her enough that she signs away any future claims. Structure it as a trust, managed by an intermediary, so the payments cannot be traced back to the family. Require her to move, preferably out of state, where the child can be educated without risk of accidental recognition. And most importantly, require her silence, not just about the affair, about the child, about his father, about the entire architecture of support that has sustained her for 6 years. The settlement is engineering, not emotion. $35,000 paid in installments over 10 years. $3,500 a year, equivalent to roughly $120,000 annually in modern terms. Enough to live comfortably, but not extravagantly. Enough to educate the boy at a good school, but not an elite one. Enough to ensure she never needs to work, but not enough to threaten the family's primary fortune. See, the payments are structured through a trust administered by a Philadelphia bank. The trustee is instructed to make monthly disbursements of $290, with the remainder held as a reserve. The child's school fees are paid directly by the trust, never passing through Catherine's hands. Her rent is paid the same way. Medical expenses are covered on submission of receipts. She is given a household budget of $150 a month for food, clothing, and incidentals. Every purchase, every expense, every decision is filtered through an intermediary who reports to the lawyers, who report to the client, who never speaks her name again. In exchange, she signs a contract. She will not contact him. She will not approach his family. She will not attend events where he might be present. She will not speak to reporters. She will not claim paternity. She will not contest the will. She will not, under any circumstances, allow the child to know his father's name until he is 21, and even then, only if the father consents in writing. The contract includes penalties for breach. If she violates any term, the trust is terminated immediately and she forfeits all remaining payments. The boy is told his father died. An accident, tragic, unavoidable. He is given a new surname, adopted through a quiet legal process that erases his connection to Catherine's family and creates a plausible fiction. He is enrolled in a boarding school in Connecticut, 200 miles away, where he spends holidays with carefully selected schoolmates and never asks questions about the blank spaces in his family tree. Catherine signs the documents. She takes the first payment. She moves to a smaller apartment in Philadelphia, far from New York social circles, far from the possibility of accidental meetings. She is 32 years old. She has a child, an income, and a lifetime sentence of silence. And the lawyers, closing the file, note with satisfaction that the cost of the settlement, while significant, is far less than the cost of a public scandal. $35,000 to eliminate a threat to an estate worth over $2 million. In business terms, it is a bargain. In human terms, it is the price of making a child disappear. The question that hangs over the entire transaction is this: can money erase a lineage problem once it exists? The lawyers believe yes. The child exists, but his claim does not, because the law recognizes only what can be proven in court, and the settlement has removed the proof. The mother believes maybe. She has security, but she has also traded her son's birthright for a monthly allowance. And the boy, growing up in a boarding school with a name that is not his father's, and a history that is not his own, will spend his life wondering why other boys receive letters from home, and he does not. But for now, the machinery of silence works. The trust makes its payments. The mother keeps her word. The child learns to stop asking questions. And the family, insulated by lawyers and distance, returns to the business of looking untouchable. The payoff that bought her silence. The settlement is not a single check. It is a system built to keep her quiet for decades. Silence is not a passive state. It is an active practice maintained through financial dependency, social isolation, and the constant threat of consequences. Catherine's settlement is not a gift. It is a contract that binds her more completely than marriage ever could, because it makes her survival contingent on her obedience. The trust is designed with precision. The monthly payments are enough to live on, but not enough to build wealth. She can afford rent, but not property. She can afford a maid, but not a household staff. She can afford to educate her son, but not to give him the connections that would allow him to compete with legitimate heirs. The money flows to her only as long as she remains invisible. If she speaks, if she writes, if she appears in any context that could link her to the family, the payments stop. And without the payments, she has nothing. The intermediaries are chosen for their discretion. The trustee at the Philadelphia Bank is a man who has managed similar arrangements for other families. He does not know the full story and does not ask. He receives instructions from a New York law firm, disburses funds according to a fixed schedule, and submits quarterly reports that confirm compliance. If Catherine requests an advance or an increase, he refers the matter to the lawyers, who deny it unless the expense can be justified as essential. There is no negotiation. There is no appeal. The contract is clear and the power is entirely on the other side. The social pressure compounds the financial control. Catherine cannot return to New York without risking recognition. She cannot attend theater, which was her profession and her passion, without encountering people who remember her from before. She cannot form close friendships, because close friendships require honesty. And honesty would mean revealing the truth of her situation. She lives in a kind of permanent quarantine, maintained not by walls, but by the knowledge that any slip could destroy the only security she has. The risks of exposure are constant and varied. Servants gossip. A maid who worked in her New York household could recognize her on the street and mention it to a new employer who has connections to the old social circle. Reporters investigate. The rise of mass circulation newspapers in the 1890s has created a market for scandal, and editors pay for tips. A junior clerk at the bank, underpaid and resentful, could sell a story to a tabloid for $50 and trigger a public crisis that no amount of legal threats could fully contain. Rivals use information as weapons. Another mistress, jilted or jealous, could expose Catherine's arrangement to damage the family or to negotiate a better deal for herself. So, the settlement includes provisions for damage control. If Catherine is approached by a reporter, she is instructed to contact the lawyers immediately. If she receives any communication that mentions the family, she is to forward it unopened. If she changes residence, she must notify the trustee within 10 days. If she marries, the payments stop, on the assumption that a husband would assume financial responsibility. If she is arrested, even for a minor offense, the trust is terminated. The contract does not just control her speech, it controls her life. There is a folklore that develops around these arrangements, a kind of paranormal economy of guilt and consequence. In the drawing rooms and social clubs, people whisper about curses on houses that hide wrong heirs. Families that pay for silence are said to suffer bad luck, unexpected deaths, financial ruin. The stories are vague but persistent. A son who was not the true heir died in a yachting accident. A daughter who inherited tainted money went mad and was institutionalized. A mansion built on hush money burned to the ground, and the insurance barely covered the loss. But the grounded explanation is simpler and more brutal. Gossip spreads because it benefits someone. A business rival leaks a story to undermine confidence in a family's stability. A social climber spreads rumors to weaken the position of an established name. A disgruntled servant sells information to settle a score or to supplement meager wages. The curse is not supernatural. It is economic. And it works because reputation is the real currency, and reputation is always vulnerable to information. Catherine understands this. She has lived inside the machinery for 6 years. She knows the settlement is not generosity. It is a transaction. She provides silence. They provide survival. The moment she stops providing value, she becomes disposable. So she builds her own insurance. She keeps the letters, the receipts, the small tokens he gave her before the lawyers intervened. She does not keep them out of sentimentality. She keeps them because they are evidence, and evidence is leverage. And leverage is the only power available to someone with no legal standing and no social position. The real question is not whether the settlement works. It does. For a decade, Catherine remains invisible. The boy grows up believing his father is dead. The wife continues to preside over the family's social life, unaware that the threat has been neutralized. The husband, relieved of the crisis, resumes his life with the confidence of a man who has solved a problem with money and competent lawyers. The real question is who profits more from secrecy, the man or the woman he pays. For him, the settlement is an expense. $35,000 over 10 years is significant but manageable. It protects his reputation, his marriage, his children's inheritance, and his business relationships. It allows him to continue operating in the world where he holds power. The cost is financial, and he can afford it. For her, the settlement is a cage. It provides security, but not freedom. Income, but not independence. Survival, but not dignity. She is paid to erase herself, to become a footnote that does not appear in any official record. The cost is her identity, her son's birthright, and the rest of her life lived in enforced obscurity. And yet, she is alive. She is housed. Her son is educated. She has avoided the poverty that destroys most women who lose the protection of a wealthy man. She has negotiated the best deal available in a system that offers women almost no leverage. Is that victory, or is it just the least terrible form of defeat? The answer depends on the day. Some mornings, she wakes in her Philadelphia apartment, sunlight filtering through cheaper curtains, and feels the weight of what she has lost. Other mornings, she watches her son practice his lessons and feels the relief of knowing he will not starve. The settlement has saved her from destitution and sentenced her to irrelevance. It has given her child a future and erased his past. It has made her safe and made her silent. And the lawyers, updating their files, note that the arrangement is working exactly as designed. No scandal, no litigation, no public recognition. The problem has been managed. The file can be closed. And Catherine can spend the next 40 years learning what it costs to be chosen, then discarded, then paid to pretend it never happened. She asks for legitimacy, not cash. When she demands a title, the old money world reacts like an immune system attacking an infection. Her name is Margaret. She is different from Catherine in every way that matters. Catherine negotiated for security and accepted invisibility. Margaret wants recognition, and she is willing to burn the entire structure down to get it. She is 42 when the crisis reaches its peak. She has been the companion of James Worthington for 18 years. Longer than his marriage lasted, longer than most legitimate wives endure. She has attended him through financial panics, business failures, the deaths of both his parents, and the slow decline of his social position as old money gives way to new. She has managed his household when he could not afford proper staff. She has entertained his business associates when respectable venues refused him. She has been, in every functional sense, his wife, except for the name. And now, in 1907, with his legitimate wife dead for 3 years and the estate finally settled, she expects him to make it official, to marry her, to give her the title she has earned through nearly 2 decades of loyalty and labor, to legitimize the relationship so that when she walks into a room, people will address her as Mrs. Worthington instead of whispering about her behind their gloves. He refuses. Not because he does not care for her. By all accounts he does. Not because he intends to marry someone else. He is 60 years old, in declining health, and uninterested in the marriage market. He refuses because legitimizing her would delegitimize everything that came before. It would mean admitting that his long marriage was a sham, that his children, now grown and married into other prominent families, were raised in a household poisoned by his infidelity, that his entire social identity was a performance, and the woman behind the curtain was never the one wearing the wedding ring. Margaret does not accept this. She has spent 18 years being patient, being discreet, being the secret that made his public life possible. Now she wants payment, not in cash, but in status. And when he refuses, she goes to war. The first weapon is social. She begins appearing at events where she knows he will be, not making scenes, not shouting accusations, simply being present, taking a seat at the theater 2 rows behind him, attending a gallery opening where his daughter is a patron, walking through Central Park at the hour he takes his daily constitutional. She is impeccably dressed, carefully polite, and absolutely unavoidable. She is forcing him to acknowledge her in public, or to visibly flee from her, and either choice damages his reputation. The society women notice first. They have always known about Margaret. Mistresses are background noise in their world, but mistresses who demand visibility are a threat. Because if Margaret can step out of the shadows and into the parlor, what stops their own husbands' arrangements from doing the same? The wives' close ranks. Margaret is uninvited from events. Hostesses who once tolerated her presence now have their butlers turn her away at the door. She is cut from guest lists, removed from social registries, and subjected to the kind of coordinated exile that only organized money can enforce. But Margaret is not Catherine. She does not retreat. She escalates. The second weapon is legal. She files a lawsuit claiming breach of promise. She argues that James promised to marry her once his wife died, that she has witnesses who heard him make this commitment, and that she relied on this promise to her detriment by forgoing other opportunities for marriage and financial security. The case is weak legally, but devastating socially, because it puts the entire relationship into public record. Court documents list the properties they shared, the trips they took, the money he spent on her, and the 18 years of what she calls a common law marriage and what he calls a private arrangement. The newspapers love it. By 1907, mass circulation dailies are competing for readership by publishing scandal. The Worthington case gives them everything they need: a wealthy man, a wronged mistress, a dead wife who cannot defend herself, and the delicious spectacle of old money eating itself in public. the case is covered daily, and reporters interview neighbors, servants, business associates, anyone who might have seen the couple together. Editorial cartoonists draw James as a hypocrite and Margaret as either a victim or a schemer, depending on the paper's political leanings. The financial costs escalate immediately. James hires a team of lawyers to fight the case. Their fees run $3,000 in the first 6 months, equivalent to over $100,000 today. Margaret hires her own attorney, funded by a group of wealthy suffragists who see the case as an opportunity to highlight the legal vulnerability of women in informal relationships. They pay her legal fees and use the case to argue for marriage reform laws. The trial drags on for 14 months, during which both sides spend over $15,000, nearly $500,000 in modern terms, to argue about a promise that cannot be proven and a relationship that everyone knows existed. The trial takes place in a courtroom, but the real battlefield is the ballroom. Because the question being litigated is not just whether James promised to marry Margaret. It is whether a mistress can force her way into legitimacy through the courts. And if the answer is yes, then every wife in the old money world is vulnerable. Because the architecture of power depends on the wife being irreplaceable. If a mistress can become a wife simply by waiting long enough and demanding loudly enough, then the fortress has no walls. The wives mobilize. They pressure their husbands to shun James professionally. They ensure that Margaret is excluded from every club, charity, and social event. They make it clear that any family that acknowledges Margaret will be cut from the network of alliances that sustains old money power. It is social warfare, precise and brutal, and Margaret is losing. But she lands one final blow. During testimony, her lawyer introduces letters, not love letters, business letters. James wrote to her about investments, asking her opinion. He listed her as a beneficiary on a life insurance policy. He sent her a telegram after his wife's funeral, saying that he looked forward to a time when they could be together without secrecy. The letters do not prove a promise of marriage, but they prove intimacy, reliance, and a relationship that extended far beyond the transactional. They humanize her and complicate the narrative that she was simply a kept woman with no legitimate claim. The judge rules against her. He finds that there is insufficient evidence of a binding promise, and that even if such a promise existed, it would not be enforceable because it was made while James was still married and therefore legally void. Margaret is ordered to pay court costs. James is publicly humiliated but legally vindicated. But the damage is permanent. James's business relationships suffer. Investors who valued stability question his judgment. His daughters, married into families that prized reputation above all else, are subject to whispers and cold shoulders. One daughter's husband quietly begins divorce proceedings, unwilling to associate his name with the scandal. The family's social capital, accumulated over 3 generations, erodes in 18 months. Margaret leaves New York. The suffragists who funded her case use it as a cautionary tale in their literature. She dies 5 years later in a boarding house in Boston, supported by a small pension from a women's aid society. She never married. She never received the title she wanted. But she forced the system to acknowledge her, and in doing so, she exposed the machinery that made women like her invisible. The lesson is clear. Legitimacy is not something you can buy with time or loyalty or even love. Legitimacy is conferred by the system, and the system protects itself. Margaret wanted to be recognized. Instead, she became a warning. This is what happens when you ask for more than money. This is the cost of visibility. This is the price of demanding that the secret become official, and every mistress in every hidden apartment learned the same lesson. Stay quiet and take the cash. Do not ask to walk through the front door, because the front door is defended by every wife, every judge, and every social arbiter who understands that if one mistress succeeds, the entire structure collapses. Margaret's mistake was believing that justice was possible. Catherine's wisdom was understanding that survival was the only realistic goal, and the wives, watching from their ballrooms and courtrooms, tightened their grip on the gates and made sure no other Margaret would ever threaten their position again. The newspaper smells blood first. The story breaks because one editor realizes shame sells better than stocks. In 1896, the New York Journal is locked in a circulation war with Joseph Pulitzer's World. They compete on every front: crime, politics, foreign affairs, and most profitably, scandal. And editors understand that readers will pay a penny to feel morally superior to the wealthy, and nothing delivers that satisfaction better than watching old money families implode in public. When a junior reporter hears a rumor about a Fifth Avenue banker maintaining 2 households, the editor does not verify it first. He prints it and dares the family to sue. The article runs on page 3, below the masthead, but above the advertisements. It does not name names initially, but the details are specific enough that anyone in the right social circles knows exactly who is being discussed. A prominent financier, a brownstone on the West Side, a woman who is not his wife, a child who bears a striking resemblance. The article invites readers to speculate, to gossip, and to feel part of an insider conversation they would never be admitted to in real life. The family's first response is silence. Dignified, strategic silence. Do not feed the story. Do not give the papers more material. Wait for the scandal to exhaust itself and for the public to move on to the next target. This works sometimes, but this time the editor has a source, a former servant, dismissed for theft, who is willing to provide details in exchange for $20 and the promise of anonymity. The second article names names. It lists addresses. It quotes from hotel registers. It describes the child, now 8 years old, enrolled in a boarding school under a false surname. And it asks the question that sells papers. If this child is legitimate, why is he hidden? And if he is illegitimate, why is he being supported at a level that suggests legal obligation? The transition from private management to public spectacle is not gradual. It is a rupture. Before publication, the family controls the narrative. Afterward, the narrative controls them. Every denial sounds defensive. Every silence sounds guilty. Every legal threat sounds like confirmation. The family becomes a character in a story they did not write and cannot edit, and the readers are invited to judge them from the safety of their breakfast tables. The publication reach is staggering. The New York Journal prints 400,000 copies daily by 1898, reaching not just New York, but every city where the paper is distributed by train. The story is picked up by regional papers, each adding its own editorial commentary. Within a week, the scandal has been read by over 1 million people. In today's terms, that is equivalent to a story trending on national news networks for days, reshaping public perception in real time. The legal fees begin immediately. The family hires a libel attorney, a man who specializes in managing press scandals. His retainer is $1,000, equivalent to $35,000 today. He files a lawsuit against the Journal, demanding a retraction and financial damages. The lawsuit costs another $4,000 to pursue over 6 months. The journal does not retract. They double down, publishing follow-up articles that detail the family's attempts to silence them, framing the lawsuit as proof that the wealthy used the courts to suppress the truth. Settlement negotiations happen quietly, in private offices far from the courtroom. The family's attorney meets with the journal's legal team. They discuss terms. How much would it cost to make the story go away? The answer, $15,000. Not as a payment to the paper, which would be illegal, but as a donation to a charity the editor supports, with the understanding that future coverage will be more favorable. The family refuses. $15,000 is nearly $500,000 in modern dollars, and paying it would set a precedent that every scandal can be monetized. But the refusal to settle has consequences. The journal continues publishing. Reporters interview neighbors, business associates, anyone who might have seen the financier with the other woman. They locate the boarding school where the child is enrolled and send a reporter to interview the headmaster, who declines to comment, but whose silence is reported as evasive. They find the Philadelphia lawyer who drafted the settlement and publish his name, forcing him to issue a statement denying any impropriety, which only gives the story another week of life. The costs multiply. The family's social engagements are canceled. Dinner invitations are quietly withdrawn. Business deals stall as partners worry about associating with a name now synonymous with scandal. The wife withdraws from public life entirely, citing illness. The daughters are removed from their finishing school to avoid the whispers of classmates. The financier's club membership is not revoked, but he is politely asked to use the side entrance to avoid encounters with other members. The settlement with the mistress, once a private arrangement, becomes public knowledge. The amounts are reported in the papers, inflated for dramatic effect. $35,000 becomes $50,000 in some reports, with speculation that the real figure is even higher. Readers debate whether the mistress is a victim or a blackmailer. Editorials argue about the morality of secret families. Preachers use the story in sermons. Reformers cite it as evidence that the wealthy are morally bankrupt. Within 18 months, the family's reputation has been reduced to a punchline. The financier's business suffers. Clients quietly move their accounts to other firms. His seat on the board of a railroad company is not renewed. His political ambitions, once credible, evaporate. He spends the rest of his life trying to rebuild what the journal destroyed in 3 weeks of coverage. And the question at the center of all this devastation is simple. Once the public knows, what is left to protect? The answer? Nothing but damage control. The secret was the asset. Once exposed, it becomes a liability. The mistress can no longer be paid for silence, because silence is no longer possible. The wife can no longer pretend ignorance, because the entire city knows the truth. The children grow up with a scandal attached to their name, a stain that follows them into adulthood. The press does not create the scandal. The family created it by building a second household and believing it could remain hidden forever. But the press weaponizes it, turns it into profit, uses it to sell papers and to remind readers that the wealthy are not untouchable, that their secrets can be exposed, that their power can be embarrassed. And every other family managing a similar arrangement learns the same lesson. Pay the press or destroy the evidence. Because once the story breaks, the only question is how much you are willing to spend to make it stop. And the answer is always more than you wanted, less than it costs. The wife turns her children into shields. She does not cry in public. She files papers that lock the fortune behind her heirs. Eleanor has spent 20 years managing a marriage that was always more contract than covenant. She has hosted dinners where she smiled at women who knew her husband kept a mistress. She has signed Christmas cards and charity checks while watching household funds drain into a parallel life she was supposed to ignore. But the moment the scandal becomes public, she stops performing patience and starts playing war. The first move is legal and surgical. She retains her own attorney, separate from the family's lawyer, a man who specializes in trust law and estate planning. She instructs him to restructure the family assets so that the bulk of the fortune bypasses her husband entirely and flows directly to their 2 daughters. It is not a divorce, it is a siege. She is cutting off his access to generational wealth while maintaining the appearance of an intact marriage. The mechanism is a trust, carefully constructed to protect the children while punishing the father. The trust holds the family's real estate, stock portfolios, and business interests. It names the daughters as primary beneficiaries, with Eleanor as trustee. Her husband retains a life income from the trust, enough to maintain appearances, but he cannot sell assets, transfer property, or change the terms. If he dies, the fortune passes to the daughters in full. If he divorces her, he forfeits the income. The structure is legal, binding, and humiliating. The costs of this legal architecture are significant. The attorney's fees for drafting the trust and filing the necessary documents total $2,500, equivalent to roughly $85,000 today. The court costs and administrative fees add another $500. But the investment is strategic. Eleanor is not paying for revenge. She is paying to ensure that her children inherit what their father's indiscretions have jeopardized. The social counterattack is equally ruthless. Eleanor does not retreat from public life. She doubles down. She accepts invitations to charity galas and arrives early, impeccably dressed, flanked by her daughters. She makes donations to hospitals and museums, ensuring her name appears in society pages for the right reasons. She hosts a luncheon for the wives of her husband's business partners, a subtle reminder that she controls access to the family's social capital. The message is clear: side with him, and you lose access to her. And she is the one who can ruin you at dinner parties. The daughters are weaponized, not cruelly, but strategically. They are 17 and 15, old enough to understand what is at stake, and young enough to be positioned as innocent victims. Eleanor ensures they are photographed at the right events, introduced to the right families, engaged to eligible young men from untarnished names. The daughters' futures are her best defense against the scandal's fallout. If they marry well, the family name is rehabilitated through their alliances. If they are socially exiled, the entire fortune becomes worthless, because wealth without access is just money sitting in a vault. The brutal contradiction is this: Eleanor must become ruthless to survive, but she must appear composed while doing it. Society praises a wronged wife only if she wins quietly. If she is too aggressive, she is shrill. If she is too passive, she is weak. The acceptable performance is dignified suffering paired with strategic dominance. Smile at the opera. Crush your enemies in the courtroom. Never let them see you sweat. The house itself becomes a theater of psychological warfare. Eleanor and her husband still live under the same roof, but they occupy different wings. They communicate through servants and lawyers. They appear together at public events and sit in silence during the carriage ride home. The daughters navigate between them, carrying messages, negotiating truces, and absorbing the emotional shrapnel of a war fought in whispers and legal briefs. There is a rumor that spreads among the household staff. The house feels haunted, Doors close on their own, footsteps echo in empty hallways. The maids claim to hear crying in rooms where no one sleeps. The cook swears she saw the late mother-in-law standing at the top of the stairs, watching in disapproval. The butler dismisses it as nerves and overwork. But the grounded explanation is simpler. The house feels haunted because everyone inside is lying. The husband lies about where he goes in the afternoons. The wife lies about being fine. The daughters lie to their friends about why they can no longer invite guests for weekends. The servants lie to protect their jobs, knowing that acknowledging the dysfunction would mean being dismissed without references. The house is filled with people performing normalcy while the structure collapses from the inside. Eleanor keeps a diary, though she destroys it years later. In it, she records not feelings, but facts. The dates her husband came home late. The amounts withdrawn from the household account without explanation. The names of people who snubbed her at events. The conversations with her lawyer about asset protection. The diary is not therapy. It is a war journal, and she is documenting a campaign. She also keeps the letters. Not the anonymous one that started this, though that is locked in her desk, but the letters from friends who express sympathy, from lawyers who confirm her legal standing, from her daughter's future in-laws who assure her that the engagement will proceed despite the scandal. Each letter is a proof point that she is winning, that her strategy of controlled aggression is working, that she can survive this and emerge with her children's futures intact. The price is loneliness. Eleanor has no confidant. She cannot trust her friends because friends gossip. She cannot confide in her mother, who would advise reconciliation out of generational habit. She cannot lean on her daughters because they are children and they need her to be strong. So she becomes a fortress, impenetrable, efficient, cold. The warmth she once performed for social purposes is gone. What remains is pure strategic calculation. And society, in watching her, draws its own conclusions. Some admire her. A wronged wife who did not collapse, who fought back, who protected her children. Others find her frightening. A woman who would weaponize trust law against her own husband is a woman who understands power in ways that threaten the comfortable fiction that wives are delicate and dependent. She becomes a cautionary tale for both wives and husbands. For wives, this is how you survive. For husbands, this is what happens when you push too far. Years later, when her daughters are married and the scandal has faded into family lore, Eleanor will be asked if she regrets staying in the marriage. She will say no, not because the marriage was worth saving, but because leaving would have meant losing control of the fortune and her daughters' futures. She stayed because staying was the only way to win. And the lesson she teaches, silently, to every woman watching, is this: love is optional. Protection is not. If you are going to survive in a world built to erase you, you cannot afford to be kind. You have to be smarter, harder, and willing to turn your own children into shields if that is what it takes to hold your ground. The house may feel haunted, but it is still hers. And that, in the end, is the only victory that matters. The mistress walks into the house. The day she enters through the front door, the marriage stops being a marriage and becomes a regime change. Her name is Isabel. She is 53 years old, and she has been waiting for 22 years. She was never supposed to be permanent. The affair began in 1886, and so when she was a widow running a boarding house, and he was a shipping magnate navigating a loveless marriage. It was supposed to be temporary, comfort, companionship. an escape from the pressures of a life built on obligations he never chose. But temporary became years, years became decades, and by 1908, when his wife dies of pneumonia, Isabel has been his real partner longer than his marriage ever was. The funeral is private, dignified. The widow is praised for her charitable work, her devotion to her children, her grace under the pressure of a scandal that everyone pretends not to remember. She is buried in the family plot, next to her in-laws, her name carved in marble alongside theirs. The obituaries are respectful. The condolence letters arrive by the dozen. And 6 months later, when the mourning period is officially over, he makes the announcement. He is marrying Isabel, not quietly, not in a distant courthouse where the papers will not notice. He is marrying her in a church, with witnesses, with a reception afterward, and he is moving her into the family mansion, the same mansion where his first wife lived, where his children grew up, where the scandal began, and where he believes it can finally be resolved. The children are adults now. His son is 32, managing the shipping business. His daughter is 29, married to a banker, raising 2 children of her own. They have known about Isabel for years. They have met her reluctantly at neutral locations. They do not like her, but they have accepted that their father's loneliness is real and that after 22 years, Isabel is not going away. But accepting her existence and accepting her as their stepmother are different calculations. Because once she walks through the front door, she is no longer the woman their father sees in secret. She is the woman who sleeps in their mother's bedroom, who sits at their mother's dining table, who will be introduced as Mrs., and who will, legally and socially, replace the woman they spent their entire lives defending. The wedding happens in November. Small, 20 guests. The ceremony lasts 15 minutes. The reception is held at the mansion, and Isabel walks through the front entrance for the first time as the lady of the house. She does not gloat. She does not need to. The door itself is the victory. The staff reacts first. The butler, who served the first wife for 30 years, submits his resignation the next morning. The housekeeper follows. The cook, the maids, the footmen, all of them leave within a month, either because they refuse to serve Isabel or because they are dismissed by her. She brings her own staff, people loyal to her, people who understand that the old regime is over and the new one is not interested in nostalgia. The children visit less frequently. The son stops coming for Sunday dinners. The daughter sends polite notes declining invitations, citing her children's schedules and her husband's business commitments. The grandchildren, who used to spend weekends at the mansion, are suddenly too busy. The house, which was once filled with family gatherings, becomes quieter, emptier, a monument to a man who chose his mistress over his lineage. Isabel does not fight this. She does not demand reconciliation. She has what she wanted, the title, the house, the legal standing. She is 60 years old. She has spent 2 decades in the shadows, managing a relationship that gave her companionship but not respect. Now she has both. If the price is estrangement from her husband's children, it is a price she is willing to pay. But the regime change has financial consequences. The son, who controls the shipping business, begins restructuring the company. He creates a separate trust for his own children, ensuring that when his father dies, the bulk of the business assets will bypass Isabel and flow directly to the grandchildren. He hires accountants to audit the estate, looking for any transfer of property that could be contested. He treats his father's remarriage not as a personal decision, but as a corporate takeover, and he responds with the same ruthlessness he would apply to a hostile competitor. The daughter takes a different approach. She cuts her father out of her social life entirely. She does not invite him to her children's birthday parties. She does not include him in holiday gatherings. She makes it clear, through silence and absence, that he has chosen Isabel over his family, and that the choice is permanent. Years later, when he dies, she will attend the funeral, but she will not speak to Isabel. She will not contest the will, but she will ensure that Isabel is never welcomed into the family narrative. Isabel, for her part, tries to build a life inside the mansion. She redecorates. She replaces the heavy drapes with lighter fabrics. She removes portraits of the first wife and replaces them with landscapes. She hosts small dinners for her own friends, women who understand what it took to survive as a mistress and who do not judge her for demanding legitimacy. She reads, she gardens, she manages the household with the efficiency of someone who has waited 22 years to do exactly this. But the mansion resists her, not supernaturally, though the servants whisper about cold spots in the hallway and doors that will not stay closed. The resistance is structural. The house was built for the first wife. The rooms are arranged to her preferences. The furniture was chosen by her. The social rhythms of the household were set by her. Isabel can change the drapes, but she cannot change the fact that every corner of the house carries the ghost of the woman she replaced. The climax of the regime change is not dramatic. There is no confrontation, no lawsuit, no public scandal. It is quieter than that. It is the moment, 2 years after the wedding, when Isabel realizes that she has won the house but lost the family, that her husband, now 70, is fading, that his children will inherit everything she cannot claim, that her legal standing as his wife gives her security but not belonging, that she is, and will always be, the woman who walked through the front door but never quite made it home. The lesson this case teaches is brutal. Legitimacy through proximity is possible, but it is not the same as legitimacy through acceptance. You can force your way into the house. You can marry the man. You can take the title, but you cannot make the children forgive you. You cannot make the staff respect you. You cannot erase the years of being the secret, when you can only replace one kind of loneliness with another. When Isabel's husband dies in 1912, he leaves her the house and a generous income. The children do not contest the will. They do not need to. They have already taken what matters: the business, the grandchildren, the family name. Isabel lives in the mansion for another 8 years, alone except for her staff, hosting dinners that fewer and fewer people attend. She dies in 1920, and the mansion is sold to settle debts. The children do not attend her funeral, and the broader lesson, the one that echoes across all 3 cases, is this: money can buy entry. It can buy a wedding. It can buy a title, but it cannot buy forgiveness. It cannot rewrite history. It cannot turn the woman who was hidden into the woman who belonged. The front door opens, but the house never forgets who walked through it first. The settlement that rewrote the family. After the scandal, the will reads like a battlefield map drawn by lawyers. The outcomes are different for each woman, but the pattern is the same. The wife protects the name. The mistress gets the cash. The children inherit the wound. Catherine, the first case, keeps her silence and her settlement. $35,000 paid over 10 years. She lives in Philadelphia until her death in 1923. Her son, raised under a false name, becomes a clerk in a law office. He never learns his father's true identity. He marries a school teacher, has 2 children, and dies in 1956, believing he is the nephew of a theatrical performer who showed him kindness. The fortune his father controlled, in over $2 million at the time of his death, passes entirely to the legitimate daughters. Catherine's name does not appear in the obituary. Her son does not attend the funeral. The settlement worked exactly as designed. She was erased. Margaret, the second case, loses everything. Her lawsuit fails. Her legal fees, funded by suffragists, total $8,000, nearly $270,000 in modern terms. She spends the rest of her life in boarding houses, supported by charity. She dies in 1912, aged 53, with no estate and no family. The man she sued, James Worthington, dies 6 years later. His will mentions her once, in a clause that explicitly excludes her from any claim on the estate. His daughters inherit the fortune, diminished by legal fees and business losses caused by the scandal, but still substantial. Margaret wanted recognition. She got a legal precedent and a pauper's grave. Isabel, the third case, wins the title but loses the family. She marries the widower in 1908 and lives in the mansion until his death in 1912. She inherits the house and an annual income of $5,000, equivalent to $170,000 today. Enough to live comfortably, but not grandly. The children inherit the business, the investments, and the social capital. When Isabel dies in 1920, she leaves a modest estate of $12,000, split between a women's aid society and a distant cousin. The grandchildren do not remember her. The family history, written by the son decades later, does not mention her name. The wives fare better, but only in relative terms. Eleanor, Ida from the first case, restructures the family trust and ensures her daughters inherit. She outlives her husband by 20 years, dying in 1932 at age 70. She is remembered as a devoted mother and a dignified woman who bore scandal with grace. The truth that she weaponized trust law and turned her children into shields is politely omitted from the obituaries. Her estate, carefully managed, is worth $300,000 at her death, equivalent to over $5 million today. She wins, but the cost is a lifetime of strategic loneliness. The legitimate children carry scars that do not appear in financial statements. They grow up knowing their father maintained a second family. They inherit wealth shadowed by scandal. Some marry well and bury the past. Others struggle with the knowledge that their inheritance is built on silence and legal maneuvers. The wound is psychological, not financial, and it compounds across generations. Grandchildren ask questions about family trees that have blank spaces. Great-grandchildren find old letters in attic trunks and piece together stories that were supposed to stay hidden. The true cost of double lives is not measured in settlements alone. It is measured in staff wages, legal fees, medical bills, and social capital lost. A final tally across all 3 cases provides scale. Catherine's case, $35,000 in settlement payments, $4,000 in legal fees to structure the trust, $2,000 in boarding school tuition over 10 years, $1,500 in household expenses above the allowance, $1,000 in medical care for the child. In total, $43,500, equivalent to roughly $1.5 million today. Margaret's case, $8,000 in her legal fees, $15,000 spent by James Worthington on his defense, $3,000 in lost business revenue as clients flee the scandal, $2,000 in bribes and settlements to silence witnesses. Total, $28,000, nearly $1 million in modern terms. And she received nothing. Isabel's case, no settlement because she became the wife. But the cost to the family is measurable. The son restructures the business at a cost of $12,000 in legal and accounting fees. The daughter's husband spends $6,000 on a separate trust to protect his own children from the scandal's fallout. The mansion, once worth $80,000, sells for $55,000 because buyers do not want a house with Isabel's history. Total family cost, $73,000, over $2.5 million today. Add it together, across 3 families, the cost of managing secret relationships, fighting lawsuits, and restructuring inheritances totals $144,500. In modern purchasing power, that is over $5 million, spent not on building wealth but on containing damage, on silencing women, on protecting reputations, on ensuring that the children who inherit the name do not also inherit the scandal. The question that hangs over all these numbers is simple. Did anyone actually win? Catherine survived but disappeared. Her son grew up safe but ignorant. She traded visibility for security, and the trade held. But survival is not victory. It is just the least terrible form of defeat. Margaret fought and lost. She exposed the system but could not change it. She died poor, angry, and alone. Her legacy is a legal case cited in law journals as an example of why breach of promise suits rarely succeed. She is a warning, not a hero. Isabel won the title and lost the family. She got the house and the income and the legal standing. But she spent her final years in a mansion filled with other people's furniture, hosting dinners that no one attended, married to a man whose children never forgave her. She proved that a mistress can become a wife, but she also proved that becoming a wife does not erase being a mistress. The wives as a class retain power. They keep the name. They control the inheritance. They preside over the social networks that determine who is admitted and who is exiled. But the cost is a lifetime of strategic performance. They cannot be weak. They cannot be kind. They have to be harder than the system that built them, because the moment they soften, they lose. And the men, the husbands who built these double lives and believed money could manage the consequences, they die. Their obituaries praise their business acumen and charitable donations. Their scandals are footnotes, mentioned briefly, if at all. They are remembered as titans of industry, flawed perhaps, but fundamentally successful. The cost they paid was financial, and they could afford it. The cost the women paid was existential, and no amount of money could compensate. The settlement rewrote the family, but it did not heal it. It just redistributed the damage and made sure the people with the least power paid the highest price. The curse of inheritance explained. The family calls it bad luck, but the pattern is simple. Secrets compound interest. The mistress economy was not an anomaly. It was systemic, built into the architecture of Gilded Age marriage, the same way servants' quarters were built into the architecture of mansions. Expected, managed, invisible to anyone who was not directly involved. The marriage market in late 19th century America was explicitly transactional. Families arranged alliances to consolidate wealth, merge businesses, and secure social position. Love was incidental. Compatibility was negotiable. The wife's job was to produce legitimate heirs, manage the household, and provide social credibility. The husband's job was to generate income and protect the family name. Fidelity was ideal but not required. Discretion was mandatory. Divorce was legally possible but socially catastrophic. In 1890, only 3% of marriages ended in divorce, and most of those were among the lower classes where reputation was less fragile. In the old money world, divorce meant scandal, and scandal meant exile. A divorced woman lost custody of her children, access to her social circle, and most of her financial security. A divorced man faced professional consequences as business partners and club members distanced themselves from the instability. So couples stayed married even when the marriage was a shell because the alternatives were worse. The power of social clubs and networks cannot be overstated. A membership in the right clubs determined access to business deals, political influence, and marriage prospects for children. A man could be blackballed from a club for marrying the wrong woman, and once blackballed, his business suffered. The clubs operated as gatekeepers, enforcing social norms through exclusion. A mistress could destroy a man's standing not by existing, but by being acknowledged. As long as she stayed hidden, the system tolerated her. The moment she demanded visibility, the immune system activated. The role of the press evolved dramatically during this period. In 1880, newspapers were primarily local and focused on politics and commerce. By 1900, mass circulation dailies reached millions of readers and competed on scandal. Editors discovered that stories about the wealthy sold papers, especially stories that revealed hypocrisy. A banker preaching family values while keeping a mistress was perfect copy. The press did not create the scandals, but it weaponized them, turning private failures into public entertainment. The legal culture of settlements was well established. Courts recognized that public trials damaged everyone involved, so lawyers on both sides pushed for private agreements. A settlement allowed the man to avoid testimony, the mistress to secure payment, and the wife to maintain the appearance of an intact marriage. Judges facilitated this, understanding that their role was not to pursue truth, but to manage social order. The system was designed to keep secrets secret and to make problems disappear through financial transactions. The eerie narration that surrounds these stories is not invention. These people genuinely believed that houses held grudges, that fortunes built on lies would crumble, that God or fate or karma punished the guilty. Servants reported strange occurrences in homes where scandals occurred. Families experienced runs of bad luck, financial panics, early deaths, children who never thrived. The explanations were supernatural because the alternative, that these were natural consequences of stress, dysfunction, and poor decision-making, was too mundane to satisfy the need for moral order. But the grounded sociology is this: secrets create stress. Stress damages health. Poor health leads to early death. Financial panics were common in this era, triggered by market forces that had nothing to do with morality. Children struggled because they grew up in households filled with lies and emotional neglect. The curse was not supernatural. It was the predictable outcome of living in a system built on deceit. The pattern repeats because the incentives remain constant. Men of wealth have access to women who have no legal standing. Women with no legal standing have limited options for financial security. Marriage is structured to be nearly unbreakable. Divorce is punishing. The press profits from scandal. Lawyers profit from settlements. Everyone involved has reasons to maintain the system, even when the system destroys them. Why did this happen so often? Because it worked. The settlements held. The mistresses stayed quiet. The wives survived. The children inherited. The system bent, but did not break. The scandals were expensive, but they were manageable. The architecture was sound, even when individual families crumbled. Why did it keep working? Because the alternatives were worse. For the men, divorce meant losing social and financial capital. For the mistresses, exposure meant losing the only income they had. For the wives, leaving meant losing their children and their position. For the children, acknowledging the scandal meant inheriting shame instead of wealth. So everyone played their part. The system persisted not because it was just, but because it was the best available option in a world with very few good options. The curse of inheritance is not that secrets haunt families. It is that secrets compound. Each generation inherits not just wealth, but the mechanisms used to protect it. The trusts, the lawyers, the habits of silence. The grandchildren learn to avoid certain questions. The great-grandchildren find locked boxes in attics and are told not to open them. The wound passes down, quieter each time, until it becomes family culture. Not discussed, not resolved, just carried. And the system, which created the wound in the first place, continues. Different names, different scandals, same architecture. Because as long as marriage is transactional, divorce is catastrophic, and reputation is currency, there will always be men who build double lives and women who are paid to disappear. The curse is not supernatural. It is structural, and it works exactly as designed. The price tag on being chosen. In the end, the most dangerous question was never who he loved. It was who history would recognize. The archive holds letters that were never mailed, wills that were revised in the final weeks of life, photographs with faces scratched out, entire lives reduced to line items in account books, marked miscellaneous or discretionary, never named, never claimed. Catherine's letters survive in a university collection, donated anonymously in 1960. They are cataloged under family correspondence, miscellaneous, because the archivists did not know what else to call them. The letters are addressed to a man whose name is redacted. They discuss household expenses, a child's schooling, requests for medical payments. They are polite, transactional. They reveal nothing about love and everything about dependency. Researchers use them to study the economics of the mistress system, but they do not use Catherine's name because her name is not in the historical record. She has been erased so completely that even the people studying her do not know who she was. Margaret's lawsuit is cited in legal textbooks. The case is used to teach law students why breach of promise suits are difficult to prove and rarely succeed. Her name appears in footnotes, her testimony is quoted in dry legal language. But the woman herself, her ambitions, her rage, her belief that she deserved recognition, all of that is lost. She is a legal precedent, not a person. She fought to be remembered and was reduced to a citation. Isabel becomes a footnote in her stepchildren's family history. When the son writes a memoir about the family business, he mentions his father's remarriage in a single sentence. A private ceremony in 1908. He does not name Isabel. He does not describe the years she spent as the mistress. He does not acknowledge the regime change, the estrangement, the years she lived alone in a mansion his mother built. She is erased not through scandal, but through silence. And silence, in the end, is more effective than any settlement. Some mistresses vanish entirely. The women who took the money and disappeared into Philadelphia, or Boston, or Chicago, who changed their names, married other men, raised their children under false histories. They are not in the archives because they succeeded. They stayed quiet. They took the settlement and used it to build new lives that had nothing to do with the men who paid them. Their erasure is voluntary and complete. They are the ones who won, if winning means surviving, without a scar that history can trace. Some wives survive with a hollow crown. They keep the name, the house, the social position. They are photographed at charity galas and remembered in obituaries as devoted mothers and pillars of the community. But the people who knew them, who watched them navigate decades of strategic performance, understand what it cost: the loneliness, the calculation, the constant vigilance required to maintain a reputation while managing a husband who built a second life. They survive, but survival is not the same as living. They are monuments to endurance, and monuments are cold. Some children inherit a fortune and a wound. They grow up wealthy, but ashamed. They marry well, but avoid talking about their family. They establish their own households and make sure their children never ask too many questions. They are successful by every external measure, but the foundation is compromised. The wealth is real, but the story that justifies it is full of holes. They inherit not just money, but the mechanisms of silence, and they pass those mechanisms to the next generation, who inherit the silence without understanding why. The final reflection is this: what does ambition do to intimacy when money turns people into assets? It destroys it completely. Intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is a liability in a transactional system. The husband cannot be vulnerable with the wife because the wife is a business partner, maintaining the brand. He cannot be vulnerable with the mistress because the mistress is a paid companion managing a contract. The wife cannot be vulnerable with the husband because vulnerability would mean admitting she knows, and admitting she knows would force a crisis. The mistress cannot be vulnerable with anyone because vulnerability would mean acknowledging that her entire existence depends on someone else's discretion. So everyone performs. The husband performs success. The wife performs ignorance. The mistress performs gratitude. The children perform normalcy. And the machinery hums along, efficient and devastating, until someone breaks. And when they break, the system does not collapse. It just replaces them. A new wife, a new mistress, a new generation of children learning the same lessons about silence and survival. Is legitimacy just another luxury good that someone always pays for? Yes. Legitimacy is the most expensive luxury because it cannot be bought outright. It can only be conferred by the system. You can buy a title through marriage. You can buy a settlement through lawyers. You can buy silence through contracts. But you cannot buy the recognition that you belong, that you were chosen not because you were useful, but because you were valued, that your existence matters beyond your function. Catherine paid with her visibility. Margaret paid with her life. Isabel paid with her family. The wives paid with their autonomy. The children paid with their peace. Everyone paid, and what they bought was not happiness or justice or love. What they bought was the right to exist within a system that would have erased them otherwise. And even that right was conditional, revocable, and priced according to how much trouble they caused. The archive does not mourn these women. It catalogs them. The letters, the lawsuits, the wills, the numbers that quantify their lives, allowances, settlements, estates, the mechanisms that managed them, trusts, contracts, intermediaries, the system that created them and then erased them. All of it is preserved, not as tragedy, but as data. Evidence of how a society organized itself around the containment of inconvenient women. And the lesson, if there is one, is not that the system was cruel. It was. But cruelty was not a bug. It was a feature. The system was designed to give men freedom and women choices, but only within narrow parameters. Freedom to keep a mistress as long as she stayed hidden. Choice to negotiate for security as long as you never demanded recognition. The people who followed the rules survived. The people who broke them were destroyed. And the people who enforced the rules, the lawyers and judges and society matrons, did so not out of malice, but out of the understanding that the system, for all its brutality, was holding something together. Wealth, lineage, order. Was it worth it? The question is irrelevant. It was not a choice. It was the world they lived in. The wives had no better options. The mistresses had no legal standing. The men had no incentive to change. And the children inherited a fortune built on secrets that were never supposed to be told. The price tag on being chosen was everything: your name, your story, your claim to a future that acknowledged your existence. Some paid and survived. Some paid and disappeared. And some, like Margaret, paid and lost everything, leaving nothing behind but a legal precedent and a grave that no one visits. In the end, the most dangerous question was never who he loved. It was who history would recognize. And history, written by the people who kept the ledgers and drafted the wills and erased the inconvenient women, made its choice. The wives are remembered, the fortunes are preserved, the children inherit, and the mistresses, the women who held the secrets that made it all possible, are filed under miscellaneous. Never named, never claimed, never counted as anything more than the cost of doing business in a world where love was optional and legitimacy was everything.